Hello, everyone, and welcome to our entertainment law panel for Catalyst Storieroad and Catalyst Content Festival. We're so lucky to have for us tonight here Hannah Mulderink from Goodman, Genow, Schenkman, Smelkinson, and Christoper, as well as Matt Valentinas from Sennett, Williams, and Rogers. Welcome to the both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here to answer our questions. The first one I'll launch out here would be, how do you both acquire clients and how do you know they're ready to work with you?
I'm happy to speak to this. I think that really sometimes we're able to give kind of preliminary advice about how to protect your IP, or to help you protect it, or to do, kind of initial agreements with people you're collaborating with. But in general, for me, there's not much for me to do until someone wants to hire you and there's a deal to negotiate.
I see. So it's something that just pops up when there is a deal nigh. That's when you want to reach out and say, hey, I've got this option on the table. What do you think? Let's start working together.
And certainly, don't we certainly advise involving a lawyer at that point, because even if you think, oh, I can negotiate my rates on my own, why should I pay for that or give away part of my, income? I think that there's just a lot of subtleties, especially if you will be entitled or want to be entitled to some sort of profit participation. I highly recommend you always engage a lawyer for that type of deal.
Mm-hmm. So the answer to that question is sort of in the question itself. They're ready when there is a deal that is sniffing around or they're about to go out with that. And definitely there's far more involved than we think. It's not just about, yes, do I want this? No, do I want this? There's many more bullet points along the way, correct?
Yeah, if you're letting someone acquire your content, that's a pretty bright line moment.
Mm-hmm. And that's definitely something we'll circle back to. Matt, what about you? Is it somewhat the same?
With me, yes, I'd say the longer I'm in practice, the more that's the case. It's really when there's money on the table, and it's having an experienced client, because I think unfortunately entertainment is so unique that a lot of people who are inexperienced might come to us way too early in the process, and then we might throw out some amounts of money that we might cost, and they start getting really scared. And that sort of scares them away. I know our firm, we're sort of a boutique firm where a lot of our lawyers came from major firms because we're trying to help the young artists come along. And so when it comes to new relationships, we'll try and be as open as we can and as affordable as we can to sort of work towards future work with them. Mm-hmm. But generally, they sort of have to know when they need an attorney. We're not going to be here to train you how to talk to an attorney, and sometimes that's where a lot of people are stuck. But generally, it's an introduction by an agent or a manager as well, if they hopefully have that already set up, or at least the key producer on the project. I would say to all the aspiring filmmakers out there, have at least one producer who's handling sort of the money, the finance, and has been down the road before with distribution. At least one person who's hopefully hired a lawyer before would be my advice.
Mm-hmm. So lots of referrals, and certainly making sure that you've got people tied in that have been down that path before you start swimming out into the deep end alone, right?
Exactly. Excellent. And if you have money, people will find you. Money attracts agents and money attracts lawyers. So if you have a budget, we'll help you. But if you have no money, my suggestion is get some money first.
So funding up front is a great plan. That's excellent advice.
A pre-production amount is what I would say.
Of course, of course. And I thank you both for those candid answers. What were you about to say, Hannah?
I think we should add something, because this is probably really helpful for the audience, which is, Matt, I'm guessing by what you said that your firm charges hourly or flat fees in connection with what your client needs from you, as opposed to taking a percentage of.
Correct. Yes, we do. We try and work with flat or hourly, depending on the size of the project.
Right. And so the difference in the way my firm works, and a lot of firms like my firm, is that we're signing, and we don't represent productions as much. We represent individual writers, directors, producers. And so we work on a percentage where we want to be involved in, that client's whole career, and we'll help you with everything you're doing, whether it's big or small. But in exchange, we would take a 5% commission on your income in the entertainment industry. And so that's a difference where, similarly, you don't want to come to us too soon, because if there's no impending deal and money to be made, we're really not going to have the time to help you, since we do kind of perspective business in that way. So that's when you are seeking out a lawyer, you need to make sure you're asking, how does it work? How do I pay you? Are you this structure or that structure? Because obviously that's going to be very important to understand before you start working with a lawyer.
That's a really important distinction. Thank you for bringing that up, because oftentimes people dance around ideas of, whether you grew up in a house, if it's not polite to go directly to money and discuss those things. But it's so important to know what your pay structure is ahead of time. That's awesome. Thank you. Let's talk about, you both have a wider range of people that you represent, from writers to directors, producers, and talent. What do entertainment lawyers like you cover? I'm sure you can speak just to your firm, but also to your private practice time. What do they cover and what do they not cover?
I think usually the most important thing to understand is that, at least in my practice, I can't get you a job. I also can't get you an agent or a manager, in large part. So you kind of have to understand that we're not creative representatives. We don't necessarily read your scripts, certainly don't give you notes. We're looking to supplement the jobs that you've either gotten yourself or an agent or manager has been able to help you get. And then when it's time to make a deal, that's when we step in and do our job of making the deal. We negotiate the deal terms, and then, a contract comes in, and we're the ones who are going to, read that and work to make sure it is as favorable to you as possible before you sign it.
And Matthew, if I might throw it to you, what are the things people have asked you to deal with or cover that are not in your jurisdiction? Like, are people asking you to negotiate their landlords and their rent? Is there anything on that line that people just don't realize isn't appropriate and not under what you cover?
I would say tax issues could be probably the most complicated, and the ones we like to avoid the most, especially with tax credits in those situations. So we'll try and work closely with their CPA or their tax attorney, or if they don't have one, refer one to them. Specifically, like, when we know enough about taxes to not get you in trouble, but we don't want to be your primary tax advisor. So it's very good to have your own CPA sort of piped in. And also, when we're sort of maybe setting up a lot of your initial corporations and other types of corporate documents, you'll want your CPA to chime in on what type of organization you want that to be and what the numbers want to look like. So that would probably be the first one. And then maybe to a lesser degree is music, perhaps having a music supervisor involved, because that can always be a real problem, especially for smaller independent films. And music is generally, I find it, the most difficult and possibly, liability ridden area of the film industry, with newer filmmakers, especially if you're not working with original material. So those would be the two. The rest, we pretty much, we cover the full gamut. If we might also just set up a payment agreement that says, here's what we'll do in pre-production, here's what we'll do in production, here's what we'll do in post-production, here's what we'll do in sales and distribution. And along the line, if other parties become involved, like sales agents or distributors, they might bring in different representation or people for bridge loans. But we try and discuss that very early in to sort of break it down so they don't feel so overwhelmed. And a lot of what we might do might come 2 or 3 years down the line. So There's really
Right.
no rush. We're just at the beginning of the process, and we're just laying it out there for you to say, hey, we're here to help if you need us. Here's what we can do. And if not, there's other people that can. But don't feel overwhelmed. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you get through the paperwork so you can really focus on the project. And that's like what I think we're here to do.
Yeah, an essential part of the team to help navigate those fine print waters. And I'm sure that everyone that you work with is absolutely grateful to have you on their side. In the meantime, if you're just joining us and you have any questions for Hannah or Matt, please do drop them in the comments. You might need to give StreamYard permission to share your name and your picture so we know who you are. But either way, go ahead and drop that in the comments. And if we have time at the end, we'll add those. In the meantime, can you tell us a little bit about how your role in negotiation differs from that of management or an agency representation?
Well, I probably touched on this a few minutes ago as far as the fact that your agent and manager are really your creative your creative representatives, and are there, for more kind of which projects should you pursue, which projects are probably a long shot. Here, let me introduce you to this producer or that producer, or hey, these people are looking for content kind of like this. Do you have anything? So those are more creative, and certainly that's how they're the ones that are able to generate opportunities for a lawyer like me to step in and negotiate your deal. And it sounds to me like Matt and I actually do something a little, our focuses are a little bit different in that Matt has a firm that's set up to help independent filmmakers make films, produce films correctly, and with all of the legal aspects covered, take you from inception to finishing a film and getting it all delivered. Whereas my firm doesn't really do that sort of, we don't really represent a production or work with a producer taking care of their entire production. We're more representing the folks as individuals, making their deals, usually with big studios, television networks, that sort of thing, where they're not running the production. Certainly we do end up doing all of our clients, of course, do independent things as well, where we'll do those deals, but we're not handling the entire production.
And Matt, would you say that that's accurate for you?
Yes. With our firm, Sennett Williams and Rogers is a boutique firm, but we're also affiliated with Needham and Williams, which is a literary agency, which I'm also an affiliated literary agent. So there I work with a lot of the book to film projects, and I also act as an agent. So but we're very clear when signing who you're signing with, if it's the firm or the agency. And additionally, I do have my own management company with long-term writing clients who I've had for 8 or 10 years, and some newer, obviously. So I've worked in all different types of ranges. And I guess the answer there would be level of sophistication. And you really bring your lawyer in when I'd say you've got an official offer or a deal memo on the table. And now it's really getting to the fine points and probably making some of the hard asks to increase money or increase protections or, reserve rights, that type of thing. That's really when you bring your manager in. A good agent will set you up well with a good outline of deal terms and what rights are being acquired. And then you just sort of make sure it's exactly what the client wants. And depending on how sophisticated the client is, they might not know what they can keep and what they can't, and what they can ask for and what they can't, to get them the right market deal. And also protect them and just make sure they're not taken advantage of, because of course the networks and the studios will take every single thing they can if you give it to them. And one word of advice I will say is, a lot of times when you're first getting into your first big deal, there can be a certain level of intimidation, or this is just the way it is, go along to get along, this is our standard deal, look, we're big, this is what we do. And obviously when you're negotiating with Warner Brothers or Disney, yes, you don't really have much leverage, but there are some things that you can change. You don't just have to take everything. So that's really important when that time comes. And that's primarily what we're there for.
Right. Just because you're handed the plate doesn't mean you need to eat off it, but that's your choice, right? You can say,
Yeah.
well, could I have a little more of that or a little less of this? There are options somewhere.
And
Speaking of what
frankly,
you,
the clients that allow us the opportunity to walk away from a deal, there'll be deals where I'm like, look, if you're able to say no, we'll get a lot more. I really believe. If you don't act afraid, let's go. We can do this. I generally get them a better deal. I'd say 80,
Mhm.
90% of the time. It's just that some clients are so scared. They want to get that first deal
Right.
that they allow themselves to be walked all over. And it's our job to tell them that that's going to happen, but we ultimately have to do what they do. But the more the client trusts you, though, I think the better the deal you can get them as well. And sometimes it's good for them to listen to people like us if they want to go for it.
Right. Being hungry versus having a bit of a poker face to see if you can eat a little better, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of the deal memo you mentioned, what are the most common types of contracts that you would negotiate? Say a deal memo between the creative and the production company, or between writers who are looking to shop a pitch around. Can you speak to the most common contracts that you arrange, or arrangements that you put forward?
For me, it's probably option and purchase agreements, acquiring the rights to book films, life story rights, maybe a shopping agreement for a reality TV show or a pilot agreement for a television show. Really, the initial agreement of some sort of rights, some anchor set of intellectual property that the client is going out there with, and someone is looking to acquire or looking to partner up with. Then we'll get involved in that stage, and either we're setting up companies for them to collaborate together, if it's a collaboration or a co-production, or we're negotiating for them with a adversary client who's looking to sort of take it over and run with it.
Mm-hmm. And do you find that most people, when they meet with you, have any sense of what those kinds of deals are? Are most people sort of in their first project very fresh to knowing what those deals even account for?
Yeah, I guess again, that's the level of sophistication of the client. So generally, I think as we go along, we like to work with people we've worked with before, or at
Mm-hmm.
least we can tell if someone's really new, if they're asking the right questions. But a lot of times, if people come to us with questions that we can tell they have no clue how the business operates, and we try and lay out expectations and in terms of where the next steps are going to be, and they're not in line with that, we can tell it might be a waste of our time and theirs to work together also. um,
Mm-hmm.
this industry can be frustrating because everyone watches television and everyone thinks they can do it, and then they just write up some ideas and come calling people like us and say, here, go make it happen. And when they have no experience in the industry, that's very, very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
um, as I'm sure my colleague could speak to as well. So
Yes.
In my practice, I represent a lot of television writers who are selling pilots and pilot scripts. And so usually I do work with kind of first time people who are selling their, first pitch ever. And I do a lot of television contracts are a bit more nuanced than selling a screenplay for, one movie to be produced, because they involve options for subsequent years and that sort of thing. So I tend to do a lot of making sure that my clients who are doing their first deal actually understand what they're getting into, what they're agreeing to, how many seasons they're signing up to before they would ever have a chance to renegotiate terms,
Right.
and that they understand what all the different deal components, how the different deal components function, because a lot of us agents and lawyers, we tend to talk in kind of a shorthand and present deal terms of, here's what you've been offered, it's this type of bonus and those sort of fees. And sometimes I have clients that are like, okay, but what actually is that? you know
Right.
and so I
Excuse
kind of
me.
want to make sure, like, if it's your first deal, let's make sure you understand what the moving pieces are.
Right. Do you feel like you want to empower your clients to ask questions of you in that way, to say, if it's unclear, please let me know, because I don't want to move past it.
Definitely.
If we're
Yeah,
talking
because
about your career and your deal. ask questions.
The last thing you want is someone coming back to you saying, well, wait a minute, I didn't realize that if I don't get sole credit, I didn't realize someone could rewrite me. I didn't realize they're allowed to hire any writer after this to rewrite me. I didn't realize I wouldn't necessarily end up with sole credit. I didn't understand that if I don't end up with sole credit, I might not be, on the pilot, I might not be attached to the series moving forward. I didn't have a clue. How did you not explain those things to me? Right. So you do want to make sure that, you've explained to them, that they understand the contract they're entering into.
Right. The biggest regret is the unasked question, right? The missed opportunity to shape that optimally. If you're just joining us, so glad to see you all here. This is Hannah Mulderink and Matt Valentinas, and they're both here today to speak to us about entertainment law. If you have any questions about that you have not seen covered yet, please do drop them in the comments, and we'll get to those by the end of our time together. Hannah, I'd love to throw to you the question that everybody is dying to know and doesn't quite understand. Why is it that you can't cold pitch and cold send to agencies? Why can't you cold call and start pitching somebody? Why can't you send your stuff unsolicited and give a direct pitch to anyone? Why legally is that?
So, historically, the sorts of lawsuits that a lot of the lawsuits that end up happening in the entertainment industry are, you stole my idea. I had that idea years ago. I told this producer about it. I told this, whoever about it. I think someone saw my script. Now you've made this, this movie that's along the same storylines or, has a similar title, and you cut me out of the project, and I'm entitled to, some form of damages, money, profit participation, etc. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways as the industry evolved to kind of protect everyone from that scenario is that, the big agent, certainly it's very difficult to go pitch to a studio directly without any relationships or anyone opening that door for you. And that's where the agents and the managers come in, or perhaps a producer who has those relationships, who has, believes in your project. But what essentially, if you try to submit, you read that so-and-so is an amazing agent, and you figure out how to get their email address, and you send them an email of, here's my script, like, surely you'll think it's amazing and you want to represent me and go sell it. Those agents don't want to be in the position. They want to know that you're coming from someone they have a pre-existing relationship with, mm-hmm. that they know, you want to protect yourself and your company from potential litigation of, I had the same idea. And similarly, studios even and production companies even more so, they're very reticent to, they get emailed scripts all the time, and they literally will just delete them from their email. They don't open them. Yeah. They don't read them. Sometimes they immediately send back an auto, kind of response that says, I didn't read this. If you want to submit something to me, you have to sign this agreement. And then they'll send a submission agreement, and the submission agreement will say something like, you can let us read your script, but you have to waive all rights that other people might have the exact same idea and might already be developing that project or producing that project, and their project might come out first, which would then, kind of eviscerate the need for, that your project might get sold because that's already out in the marketplace. Right. And so, but submission agreements, when there are agents and managers that, people have relationships with, lawyers that people have relationships with, then the studios, the production companies, agents, managers, as between other representatives, feel more comfortable accepting a submission because they kind of know that that there's someone else guiding, that writer, that producer, who understands that, they aren't they'll never be advised to, yeah, let's go sue Universal because, you know, they made a movie about such and such and I wanted to make a movie about such and such.
Well, because we've all seen that, right? When there are two movies about Alexander the Great that come out at the same time, or two movies about the war that come out at the same time, that either someone shared it here and they didn't go for it and something kind of like it happened over here, or ideas are bouncing back and forth, or we all don't have the most original ideas. These stories do exist in particular formats where ideas pop up and are kind of in the zeitgeist sometimes. And so to avoid that potential litigation, it has to pass through a trusted intermediary as a filter of credibility, right? Speaking to some of those rights, can you, Matthew, speak to the difference between registering work with the WGA versus getting a copyright with the Library of Congress?
Sure. Registering it with the WGA is almost, it's as much as I appreciate the WGA, it's more, I think, of a money gathering system for them, right? It might make a young screenwriter feel great about being protected, but it's my understanding that generally the WGA rights expire. The few times I've actually had to track down the WGA rights, they have expired in some big litigation situations, and you know, they're a good secondary backup to prove that your copyright. But initially, getting it from the Library of Congress is the most important thing, especially for screenwriters with no money, because you want to make sure that your screenplay is copywritten before it's infringed upon, because then you can get damages. And having that document from the copyright government, you know, from the government copyright office, will actually give you the ability to attract the big firms that will be able to possibly track down and get you some money back, right? Because think of it this way. To bring a case like that, you're going to need 100,000 likely minimum. They're looking for like $1 million payoff for that type of case. You got to think that term for a big firm to really take it on, and they're not going to do that with the WGA document, but they'll at least require that you have the copyright from the government. So that's probably the most important thing young screenwriters can do. And I think a lot of the information they're getting out there is based off of old screenwriting books from the 80s and 90s, you know, in the heyday of the development deals when people were just picking development deals from trees. And they think that's the way to go, but it's really not in terms of litigation.
Right. And I think there are distinctions as well with the WGA versus the Library of Congress in terms of when you need to register something. Basically with the WGA, some people that I know do it as, this was the first time that I had the idea, and now it's dated and marked, this was the first time I had the idea. But then you go and change the script 7 times, and that is what needs to be, because those are the words in that order that you want to register. But also, I know some people still try to do the old school, well, I mailed the script, I printed it and mailed it to myself, and I didn't open it. Does that even work?
It works, but you can update your versions with the Library of Congress to make sure it's adequate. Or you can even sometimes we'll just register a treatment at the beginning of a project just to sort of get it going, just to show that there's a history. It's something that maybe a court or the other side would want to see, that there's a paper trail of when the actual idea was born. So I understand what you're saying about initial projects being with the WGA, but you can do that with the government copyright office as well. And often we go back and we just send in the revised script. But as long as there's generally something there, it scares off other people, because they'll check.
Right.
They'll look if they want to steal your projects. Generally, they'll see if it's there or not. Because I've known some people who've done everything correct, who are in the unions and guilds, who are represented by major agents, who've done major studio deals, and have been completely ripped off by studios. It's rare. Most cases are brought after the film is released and everyone's looking for a quick settlement. But I've seen 2 or 3 cases in my life of people I actually know where everything was done right. They're still in the industry and successful, but they were ripped off for millions of dollars. So you got to be careful, and you got to get it right from the start.
Yeah, so it makes it worth the fee, whether it's 38 or 65 or whatever they are now, who knows, 85, depending on whether it's treatment or the actual full project itself or the full season. Whatever it is, it's going to be worth it if you're getting ripped off for millions is the alternative.
Well, and the
I
sad
would say.
truth, the sad truth is a lot of times what's going to matter most is which side has more money to spend. Okay, so even
Right.
if you're correct, they might have more millions to spend and steal a project from you, and they will if they can. I've
Right.
seen it done. So it's not even about what's justice. It's just you're trying to give your litigation attorneys, and generally I set up material so it's strong enough that this doesn't happen, and if it does, I pass it off to the litigation team. I don't
Hmm.
litigate myself.
Right.
Um, but you want to be able to give the litigation team enough material, A, to attract them so your client can get a big firm to represent them, and B, to give them enough tools to fight with to at least scare away or get a settlement.
Right. Right. Well, with that in mind, and speaking about the things that we need to take care of, what are the most important things to consider when negotiating with our own IP? What are the things we stand to lose? You mentioned earlier the rights to not be replaced, right? Or the perpetuity of the idea. I know we heard Michaela Cole was talking about that with regard to taking I May Destroy You after her success with Chewing Gum on Netflix, taking I May Destroy You to Netflix. Netflix said, we're going to retain the rights. She said, no, thank you. Then she took it to HBO and got what she wanted. Can you all speak to that a little bit?
Matt, do you want to take that?
Sure, I'm happy to start. This is I have a good specialty in life rights, nonfiction life rights. So I represent a lot of true crime people or people in the news, or current affair subjects that can be turned into books. So this is an important subject, and a lot of times I will sell material based off of. I will generally try and chop up the material into many ways possible. Book rights, documentary rights, dramatic rights, nonfiction rights, audio rights, and more recently podcast rights. Some of my biggest deals in the last year or so have been podcast deals, and that area is really expanding, and it's very interesting to see how it's competing with the publishing market. And now you're seeing fictional podcasts come on board. So what I try and explain to the person is, hey, we always have your life rights. You are born with those. No one can take those away from you. Be careful who you bring in to associate with. A lot of times people that have really interesting life rights will then have some family member or some friend involved. There's always somebody in the middle, not always, but often, who can screw up the deal. So the first thing I do is when someone has valuable life rights, I tell them, look, you got to cut out this middleman, or I'm working for you. I'm not working for them. These are your life rights. If they want to buy some of your other rights to work with you to sell them, they need to option or buy those rights from you. And then we sort of set up different deals, and we'll go out to different types of people, because rather than, I would call this reserving rights. If you go to a production company or a studio, they're going to try and take all the rights from you. But if they're just making a film, they're going to do nothing with the television rights, or vice versa, right? Or if you go to a podcast company, generally they're going to want everything because their goal is to maybe get a television show. But you can use that as a tool to get more money from them in the negotiations, right? You try and reserve as many rights as you can. I've started deals where I've just sold recorded interviews to a studio before there's even a book, and then the studio loves the interviews. They take the interviews, and then I go out and I get a book deal, and then while the book deal is being done, I do a deal with Rolling Stone magazine, where maybe I don't own the copyright to the article, but it helps drive interest for the book and the film deal. And then I also will sell the documentary rights. So here you're getting 4 or 5 income streams based off of one story idea, and they're all competing with each other because as we all go through development hell, things can take forever, and one project might find more steam than the other, and you never know which one's going to take off. So
Right.
with your IP, it's your most important thing, and don't think about giving it all up. Think of chopping it up, is what I'm trying to say, and think of different people to go to for different specialties.
That makes perfect sense. What about the process of obtaining rights to someone else's intellectual property?
I can probably speak to this more because Matt clearly is usually on that side. By the way, anytime someone comes to me with their own life rights, I'm going to refer them to you, because certainly great. you understand exactly how to protect someone who is on that side of the negotiation. I am more frequently representing a writer who wants to adapt something, a producer that wants to acquire life rights or acquire someone's book and then go out and find a writer to write it. So I end up doing a lot of option purchase deals from the producer's side of making sure that my client has obtained the rights they need. Maybe make sure it's not just television rights, make sure that producer is getting all of the rights that Matt's trying to chop up, right? I'm trying to say, no, we need, if we're going to put up money and pay an option fee, we want the ability to switch it from a TV project to a film project. Because what if Netflix says, we love this, but we think it's a movie? We want to make sure that if, the initial interest is a podcast and someone wants to invest in a podcast because they're less money to get started and get out there, with the hope of then selling that, being attached to the film or feature rights. But certainly, it starts with finding out who controls the intellectual property. If it's an article, does the author of the article own the article, or does, as you say, Rolling Stone own the article? So make sure you're getting the rights from the person who actually controls them, and make sure that they haven't already given away some pieces of those rights to other people that you don't know about. If someone had already given away the podcast rights, or actually what happens a lot in my practice is the difference between the narrative rights to an idea and the documentary rights to an idea, or documentary rights to a certain situation or historical event that happened. Because a lot of time I represent a lot of documentary producers, and they say, well, wait a minute, if I'm going to put all this time and energy into producing a documentary for such and such distribution, and someone then wants to do, hire these A-list actors to act out that story, and I'm the one who put out the documentary that made everyone aware of the project, I want to be attached as producer to that narrative adaptation of the story. And a lot of times, clients who would be represented by Matt, for example, are saying, wait, no, we're only giving you the documentary rights. We aren't giving you the narrative film rights, because we want to retain those, because we'll make a lot more money selling those separately than if we gave them to you for the small amount of money you're paying us to do a documentary.
Right.
And to jump in, I've done deals exactly like that, where I've made sure that people aren't trying to do an end run with the documentary, where I say, you can have the exclusive documentary rights. The documentary might come out before any other project, but you will not have the feature film rights based off of the documentary. Okay, we're retaining those. So a lot of times they'll try and do it that way. Or a lot of times documentaries are used just as feature film. They're almost like a longer concept pitch. It's just a documentary, and it's a good way to get the project out there. And if you look at so many projects, like recently, I can think of White Boy Rick as one, or here in Boston, The Fighter started out as a documentary, sort of based off an HBO documentary. So many films are based off of documentary. That it's a good way to, you got to be smart about what you're doing with that, and who's trying to come for, and smarter companies will come and they'll know that. And also, if another example with like a Rolling Stone article, for instance, and another one that I've teamed up, the writer owns the copyright, but for him to actually have access to my client to do the interview, my client's currently not famous outside of the criminal world, and the writer's not paying for his rights. What we do is we set up a producing agreement, right? that, okay, once this is published, and then we're working with your manager, once it gets sold, you will have to acquire the life rights, and that my client's going to be a producer on the project type of deal, right? So that's how you can sort of protect your clients while getting the story out there, and the author's still happy and getting his money, and everyone can sort of work together. And at least you got to get that on paper. That can be very hard to do, but getting it on paper to make sure that your client's not ripped off is very important. Because if Dogs of War is a recent film that was that came out, that was just based off of an article, and they never got the life story rights, and the guys whose life story it was based on, he sued, and I think he ended up losing. But generally, even if they're doing a story, like I have many clients who will have interesting articles written about them, and people are always pursuing their stories, but it's not their life rights. They're just pursuing the stories from New York Times or something like that. But generally, the best companies will always eventually come for the life rights, because if they're investing 20, 40, 100 million in a film, and sure, maybe they bought the book, they're going to go out there and buy the magazine and the life rights just to cover themselves, to do business correct. And generally, the life rights are more valuable than I think anything else. So they'll like to have them locked up. But in a few rare occasions, they haven't done that. But it's generally the life rights are the most important.
Right. Well, you heard it here. Not getting anything past Matt or Hannah. Don't even try it. They've seen it before. I would love, in just the few minutes that we have left, to touch on a few more points. Can you tell us about packaging? Why does it make it a sweeter pitch, a better offer, a better option or opportunity to come to the table with either showrunners or talent or directors attached?
I think that a lot of times there's so many pitches out there. There's so many people, trying to get their ideas set up, trying to get their pitches bought, that a lot of financiers and studios are far more interested in projects where there's already some heat. There's already maybe a well-known actor who's interested in playing a role, or there's already a director attached who has some directing credits, and they know that there's already kind of some of the elements needed to someday get that green light are already in play, and they won't have to spend a significant amount of energy going out trying to get that lead actor, trying to get a director to sign on, because getting those elements later, depending on the type of material, can certainly elongate your development process. This is why so many times it takes years and years and years to get a project to fruition.
It's not only who you know, but wait a minute, I don't know if I can say that properly. It's who you know and who they know. I was trying to find another way to say it, but that wasn't it. But that ultimately, if you can get those people on board, especially if you've done your homework and you have a track record, if that person has a track record at Netflix and you really think that your show belongs on Netflix, if that showrunner has experience on Netflix, you've already truncated that timeline, that they have a shorthand already, right?
The other thing that's really important about it is, if you don't have your own agents and managers that are helping you get your pitch out there, but you've been able to attach someone who does have those things, oftentimes, that agent will end up kind of running point on making those introductions to various buyers that you need. So it's kind of a way to piggyback off someone who's more established in the industry and has those representatives and connections.
It's a beautiful way to make it an even sweeter deal, to have that ahead of time, to have those connections. Go ahead.
I will say, though, be very careful about attaching a multitude of producers to your projects. There are a lot of people out there that are like, yeah, I'm a producer. Yeah, I know these people and that people. And I've had so many clients who've signed attachment agreements with very, oh, such and such production company, wants to attach to my project, and they know someone at Netflix, and they know this person. And sometimes there's so many producers out there, there's so many production companies out there that you and you're inviting those people onto your project. You want to make sure that you're someday, if they aren't able to set it up, you're able to get your project back entirely and they're no longer attached. You don't want to have so many producers on a project that they're later fighting over who gets what piece of the pie, and maybe you end up with producers that really didn't end up bringing any value to the table. But
That's
you're still not able to produce your project until they've agreed on their own producing deal, so they can end up kind of hamstringing you.
Right. It's almost as if you're going to a party or a buffet with more mouths, right? There's more people at the party that you're going to be spreading and making more of the spread available to more people, therefore complicating what you're trying to do and making sure that each one of those people needs to be happy along the way. That can really complicate things. I would just go ahead.
A lot of people think that the more producing attachments they have, the more it's kind of different than an actor or writer or director attachment. Those producers better really have those relationships, really be able to make those introductions. And a lot of people think that just the more producers they have attached, the more that looks like, hey, it's all packaged up. And what I constantly have to tell my clients is, stop inviting people to the party. Stop inviting your friends to the party. Stop.
Right.
Just really focus on, is this person going to bring the value that will actually help move my project forward?
Right. It's a great point. What is the value add? And lastly, we would just love to know, because this is so important right now with all of the original content that's happening. Does releasing your own show online create any legal issues for future deals? If you've released it for free or on a paid platform, maybe that distinction is part of it as well. But does that get in the way of anything, or does it actually help with regard to television?
I think it as long as you're not looking to exploit that project again, if it leads to the next project, it helps. If you're trying to get money off the current project, it hurts. I think you should always keep your material as exclusive as possible. Never let anybody see anything. The second you throw up something on YouTube, it's like a great car driving off the lot. It's just you losing value. But also, if you've tried everything else and you've got nowhere else to go, it's a fine line. You have to be committed to doing those YouTube shows and building value to them, and or whatever stream you're on, and sticking with it and being disciplined. Because then I've seen people sell ideas and projects to the next level based off of that. So from a legal issue standpoint, no. But from a future deals issue, I think you really have to know what your goals are and what you're trying to do before you release it. I always say never make anything unless you have a distributor already lined up to sell it. But that's a lot harder to do than is actually done. But if you're stuck with a project that no one wants to release, I was involved with a controversial documentary project that we just did for goodwill reasons more so than profit. So we were able to throw it up for free. And now we're currently negotiating with someone who's going to buy it off us for a good deal of money, but not what we would have gotten originally back in the day. But I'd say that's rare. So I would say use online shows only really as a portfolio to show what you can do. And then also, if you're committing to it, really stick to it. Like, there's nothing worse than seeing like an online show that has 2 or 3 episodes and it's still up on your website from 4 years ago and you're still shopping that around. It doesn't really show that you have much level of commitment or that you're as professional as you might think you are.
Right.
As well. So generally I try and stay away from it.
Thank you for that.
I'll add that I do see clients who have, done very low budget productions of, short form web series. Each episode is 5 minutes. There's 6 episodes, and they purposely, you know, it's all a tool to sell a full length television series based on that concept, but to have kind of a proof of concept to show people of what it really is, or how funny it is, or how dramatic it is, or what an unusual concept it is. As far as I have seen those people, you know, some people are able to put it up online, find a way to get some followers, some viewers, maybe to track some manager or an agent, and that helps you in future deals, as Matt says. But I think that, and it certainly does show what you're capable of producing on your own. My biggest advice would be, if you're going to do that, spend as little money, especially of your own money, as possible, because you're never going to make that money back, likely, right? And you don't want to, don't ever go out and produce something that, as Matt says, has no distribution, that you invested significant funds in, only to find out that the market out there doesn't value your project to the same level that you spent on it. And, you know, maybe you'll get some little like internet license deal of, you know, so and so will put it up on their shorts festival or something, and you're like, well, I spent $100,000 and they're giving me, you know, $1,000 to air it on their platform for a year. And so the other thing you want to do about, if you are doing those types of small license deals, you want to make sure you're very careful about what rights you're giving away, how long you're giving them away for, whether or not that platform has exclusive rights to your content, and also really making sure that you control the derivative rights, especially if you're doing short form content or podcasts, for example, that you're using as a platform to sell it as a full you know, a bigger budget production. You don't ever want to give away the right to make that derivative film or television series. You want to make sure you've retained it, and preferably that you're not allowing the platform to attach to it, to be a part of selling those derivative rights later.
A super important point. We did have one comment just come through that, if you'll forgive me, I'll beg you to answer this. This was, any questions, or rather any thoughts on fiction or world building project gotchas or issues that happen in the pitching stage that might easily be avoided? What comes up in pitching that might easily be avoided as an issue in world building or fiction?
I'm relating that mostly to sci-fi, and I'm thinking that the only issues I could possibly foresee are budgetary expense, or technology, in terms of whether they can, you know, can the previs software do it? What is the actual visual imagery that you have in mind, and how are you going to pull that off? Is this going to be live? Is it going to be animation? Is it going to be, you know, what form of technology are you going to be using? And do you have sort of the right technical advisors involved with you to get that going through a studio stage? Because generally animation projects, they take 10 years, right, to really, from beginning to end, to really figure out that whole process, and you really need to work with the people in those divisions to know what they're doing, and to really plan out the front, and also make sure that you have all the rights to make sure that none of the future worlds that you're doing are related to any other future worlds that somebody else also owns somehow, right? Make sure there's no derivative attachments in there. It's kind of like, it's hard to look into the future, but I think that's what they were asking. I'm not entirely.
Anything to add, Hannah?
Yeah, I think one note, especially for first-time filmmakers or writers who are selling, you know, or this is the first screenplay they will sell, or trying to get a screenplay out there, even though they've never had a screenplay produced. It's important, I think, in a way, to understand and be realistic that the first time you have a script acquired, it's probably not going to result in $100 million film being produced. And so if the
mine's really good,
if the world that you have built requires a huge production budget, a huge production, high production value to execute. You've created a huge mountain to climb that's going to be very hard to, roll that stone up, because it's much more likely, if you have a screenplay that's, fun and quirky, or, super new, cool idea, or whatever it is, but you can actually, or even like a really cool sci-fi paranormal, but it's something that can be executed for $5 or $10 million. You're a lot more likely to sell that screenplay and for that screenplay to be produced if you're you're selling your first project.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's just setting yourself up optimally, smartly, doing the research ahead of time. I thank you both for your insights. This has just been outstanding. Thank you for being so generous with your time. This is Hannah and Matt. Please avail yourselves of thanking them at the moment. And thank you all at home for watching. This has just been wonderful. And thank you both for sharing your insights with us.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers.